Yo, yo, what's up, kids? It's been a long time since I've done this. I don't even know what I'm doing anymore. I sort of fell off the track. Started getting more into my reading and more into my routines of everyday life. And I've come to find that the videos are sort of something I have to do from time to time, whether I have anything to say or not. So I have no idea what I'm going to talk about. I just want to get something out there because, well, let's just say I missed you. And my channel hasn't grown one bit. It's still the same dinky little channel, no views, nothing, all alone in this little world. But it's okay because I think for me, it's just it's not really about anybody else, and so we'll leave it at that for now. If ever I grow some sort of an audience, then maybe at that point it'll be for them. But for now, it's just you and me. Okay. So I do have some books here that I wanted to talk about a little bit. And I kind of picked them at random. Some of them I've read, some of them I've read parts of, some of them I plan on reading a little bit more about. I don't even know if I can really say a whole lot about any of them. But if you've seen any of my videos before, I've kind of described my reading process that I have come to as of like the last 3 years, 4 years maybe. Because, for the, first 40 some odd years of my reading life, I would just read a book from cover to cover. Like, I think the first book I ever read was The Hobbit back in, 1984, something like that. And I was so proud of myself when I got through it, even though I couldn't probably remember a lot of it. Because, when you read your first couple of books, you're not sure how to do it. And for a long time, when I just read fiction, and it was something like Stephen King, which was really easy reading. I mean, Stephen King, he's got some good stories and everything, but his writing is sort of like on a ninth grade level. So when I would read Stephen King, I'd find myself just reading at a pace. And there was a consistent pace with every Stephen King book because they're all written sort of at the same level. And I think that that's probably maybe sort of the genius of what he does, is that he takes a decent story and presents it to like even, a middle schooler who can read it. I think I read my first Stephen King books in middle school. I think I started with The Shining and a few others. I think I got The Stand like in between 8th and ninth grade and read that. And I really liked that stuff for a long time. Now, I cannot stand Stephen King now. He is the most annoying piece of shit that I've ever heard talk at this point. But, that's the problem when you get to know these people who create these great things. I mean, you've got this great art, and maybe the guy should just sit back behind his typewriter and shut the fuck up. But for some reason, now that he's got a computer and can get online, he feels impelled to go on Twitter and just vent out this effusive sort of Trump derangement syndrome that he has, which, I get it. Like, not everybody likes Trump, like, let's just get that out there. But not everybody likes him, News at 11. Not everybody likes Trump. Least of all, Stephen King. Stephen King is negatively obsessed with Trump. And I know a lot of people who are. Now, I have my obsessions, but it's usually with things that I like. I have never obsessed over something that I dislike. It just seems like that someone's living rent-free in your head at that point. But with Stephen King, people like Stephen King, Robert De Niro, Rob Reiner, the three Stooges of Twitter, these guys just can't shut the fuck up about Donald Trump. And I just don't get it. I mean, he just doesn't affect my life that much. I don't think he affects their life that much. I think maybe there's something to it to where they're just trying to get brownie points. It's an easy win for the audience because you know you've got this certain demographic of people that are just ripping out their hair over Donald Trump. And so if they see that there's a famous person who's also feels the same way, that they got a client for life, right? So I can't get on board with people who obsess over politics and people in politics. And the political world is more pronounced. I've been saying for a while that politicians are the new rock stars because there hasn't been any real worthwhile musical prevailing genre since the onset of things like music on YouTube, and you can listen to a whole album on YouTube. MTV was something that kind of held the consensus together. There was radio, and I haven't listened to the radio since probably 1994. I think the last time I listened to the radio was like when Dr. Drew and Adam Carolla were doing their Love Line show. That was kind of interesting. I never got on the whole Howard Stern bandwagon, but there's another guy who just he at one time in the late 90s when the whole shock jock thing was in and bands like Marilyn Manson were sort of ruling the day, it was important to be offensive. Like if you were going to be anybody who had any kind of clout, you had to be offending people. And that offending people was the cool thing to do. It was considered subversive. But you got to remember that was a time when, even though, Clinton was president for a lot of that, you had Republican Congress, you had Republicans sort of in charge of the culture in one way or another. And even Bill Clinton, by today's standards, would be considered like far right today. He sounds like most of the Republicans in the GOP. It's just part of the reason why I've never, as a bona fide, self-professed right-winger, I've never considered myself to be a Republican. I don't have any affinity with the Republican Party. I don't care for any of those people. In fact, I went back and was listening to some old videos, and this stuff all looks like it was shot on actual video camcorders, this stuff that used to be on TV. And you hear these Republican senators talking and these holy rollers like Rick Santorum and people like that. And it's really cringe. They're kind of they were the Republican politician, the stereotypical Republican politician of the late 80s and through the 90s. They were all almost like these television evangelist types, and they hung out with television evangelists. They had a network, and that was back, I think, when a lot of those television evangelists, the whole moral majority, those people, they kind of had a foothold in our culture as far as the boomers were concerned. Now, the Gen Xers just kind of laughed at them. We would sit up late, get high and get drunk and watch television evangelists like Robert Tilton and just laugh our asses off. I was really surprised to see that Robert Tilton still has his own channel. He has his own YouTube channel. And it's crazy. I'm surprised that guy's still alive. That was a dude who was having these old ladies from the 80s send him basically their entire pension check. Whatever they were getting, they would donate it because he would tell them that, if they donated their money, that, God would reward them tenfold. That even in this life, they didn't even have to wait to get to heaven, that their riches would be expanded upon due to the great powers of heaven. And it was crazy that this guy got away with this for so long. These grifters that just got away with it. Send me money, send me money. I don't think you could do that now. There would definitely be I mean, these guys must have been really highly connected in the network because they never seem to get audited by the IRS or have their property confiscated or redistributed or anything like that. There was no talk of that kind of stuff. These guys were just like, I'm going to take your money because I can. And that just seemed to be the order of the day. And there was plenty of old women who were willing to whip out their checkbook and sign their life away to these guys. And it's just really crazy. Robert Tilton was, I think he was probably the most audacious out of all of them, if I could say that. I mean, Oral Roberts went pretty far out on a limb. I think he said that God would kill him unless, he reached a certain sum. It was like crowdfunding back in the day, but with a twist. And what's funny is, like, if you watch Alex Jones today, he has something about him that's a little bit like those television evangelists from the 80s. He's all full of bluster, and he's got these products that he sells, and he's always on the brink of having his channel taken by the government, but it just, every day he's still on the air somehow. So we'll see how that rolls out. And I do watch his stuff from time to time. I think he's entertaining. Like, I don't necessarily believe what he's saying all the time, but like, he actually has a better track record than any of the corporate media that I've seen. He's more correct than CNN, Fox, and NBC put together. But, you have to know when people are being hyperbolic. I think I've always had a pretty good innate bullshit detector. I see people all around me, even some very intelligent people a lot of times, that are really drawn in by false narratives. And the one that kind of got me was COVID. Out of all the bullshit false narratives that have ever been foisted on the world population. And that was part of the reason why I thought there was something to it, was because it was global. And that was the first time that a psyop that I had seen had ever gone so global that everybody was on the same page. And it just really goes to show what a foothold the globalist governance powers are starting to flex at this point. Because you had the World Economic Forum was finally, like, they were kind of coming out of the woodwork and speaking out on more stuff. You always saw, Klaus Schwab was making all these appearances with his... He looked like the villain from Bill and Ted's Bogus Journey. Remember Chuck Denomalos, who showed up with his inflatable suit on? And it's just comedy. It's comedic if it wasn't so scary by the fact that this guy actually has some power and a lot of influence. But I guess he's stepped down since then. I think people just laughed at him too much. They kind of laughed him out of the room. But they just replaced him with somebody else. For a minute, they had the Nestle CEO with the cyborg eye. He looked like Eddie from Iron Maiden after the Somewhere in Time installation of the little eye camera that he had, the little red thing. Anyway, yeah, I don't know what happened to this guy's eye. He got all full of blood somehow and just never healed. But as far as these books, so one kind of book set that I've been, can't even find it. Where is it? One sort of book set that I've been interested in reading quite a bit. I can't find the one I wanted to show because it had a certain cover, but these right here, oh, here it is. Jesus, they look like this. You've probably seen them, and they feature presidents, dead presidents. This is Madison, the writings of Madison. And I've got another one. This one is Washington. This one is Thomas Paine. Jefferson. Okay. And they all have a similar cover. I just took the cover off of some of them. Some of them came without covers. I buy them used. Some of them have slip cases. Here's a slip case for Washington, But what it is, it's Library of America. The Library of America series, and it's usually the forefathers. They have, I think, so I've got some other ones. I've got Grant, Ulysses S. Grant. I've got Hamilton. I've got, which ones? Oh, just one on the American Revolution, and then also the Constitution, like the Constitutional Convention or whatever. And those books are great because even this book, like, it doesn't look very thick, but it's like 880 pages. They're like Bible pages. They're so thin, and they're very nice editions. You don't see any typos in there. Like, they're very well constructed, and they're good. They're good to read. I think that if you're gonna know history and you're gonna know about the founding of the country, these are important books to read. And I don't think a lot of people really read them. Oh, Ben Franklin, volumes 1 and 2. I've got that as well. And these guys. I mean, it kind of gives you a little bit of a perspective into their lives at the time. It gives you a perspective into the time in which they were living, because they didn't have, all this technology we have today. And so you got your 1700s technology. And one that I've gotten the furthest in is, I've got Washington and Paine, Thomas Paine, are the two that I've gotten the furthest in. And Thomas Paine was more of an intellectual. He was kind of like more of a, what you'd call a keyboard warrior of his time. They back then, their social media spats were like through the newspaper, and so you had to wait to hear some guy's rebuttal. So in a way, it's kind of like watching like a Facebook like debate, where people battle it out on Facebook, but you have to wait a week, I guess, for the next. I mean, that life must have been pretty dull, in those cases where people were obsessing over that stuff. But that was how people flex their political muscle at the time. And there wasn't a lot of name calling, but there was a little bit of it. Thomas Paine was a little bit of a snarky guy. And they would use pseudonyms a lot. And so he was going after one of the critics of his pamphlet, the Common Sense. So Common Sense is the first piece of literature you find in that book. And then after that, there's a series of public letters that go out in the newspapers, and it's him sort of battling it out. But you don't get the other person's letters. You only get his letters where he's replying, but he'll quote the person. So it's kind of funny, and it's kind of interesting. But like I said, he was more like a behind the pen kind of guy. But Washington was a badass. And like a lot of people think of Washington as just being this old guy with a wig. That dude, I mean, for one, you're seeing like old pictures, like pictures of him when he was old. Because he, for his time, he lived to be pretty old. But when he was younger, he was a badass. And he was a soldier. And, for at first, what was the British government, he was an enforcer of the crown, during the whole French and Indian War. And it's pretty crazy, like some of the letters that he writes where he describes, oh yeah, we got ambushed yesterday. And like they would get attacked by these, battalions of French and Indians who were given guns. And, he would wind up with like bullet holes in his clothes, but it's like, oh, I'm not dead yet. And they would go out, they would sleep outside. And this is like in Virginia, where in the middle of winter, where it probably gets pretty freaking cold, I would imagine. I did spend the winter in Virginia once, and it was pretty cold at the time. I can imagine sleeping outside for months on end would be, that would be tough for sure. But yeah, Washington was pretty badass. He would just kind of show up in a town, like this is like his new assignment, and he had to try to recruit as many people as he could. And there's people who are fleeing the town, but like the French and the Indians are coming up over the hill. And so these people who are leaving, he basically like puts a sword up to their neck. He's like, you're not going anywhere. You're going to fight, motherfucker. And so he would approach these strangers, conscript them into the army. Well, they had an obligation to be part of the militia. And so he enforced it. And it was it's pretty interesting to just read the verbiage and how they talk about their horses and everything. They didn't have cars back then. Imagine that. 1750s, they didn't have cars. But all those writings are really interesting. It's mostly letters and journals on Washington's part, because he didn't have time to sit down and write, a piece like Common Sense. Like Thomas Paine got to sit in his nice, under his oil lamp and his, his fuzzy wuzzies and his, you have his little fire going at the fireplace and be able to, wax philosophical on the pages of his manifesto. But Washington was out in the sticks, and he was fighting, and he was wrangling and just being a man's man, and that was who Washington was. And I just don't even know that they make people like that anymore. Like, I was noticing something kind of crazy when I would go on, lately when I go on YouTube, like a lot of the YouTubers I listen to, I was really surprised at how very feminine a lot of men sound today when they speak. Like, a lot of the men who are podcasters today, even the straight ones, people in the 80s would have thought they were gay because of the way that they talk, because they speak really feminine and really soft, and like, I don't want to name any names because like some of these guys they're pretty influential, and I can't even think of any of their names right now. And there's this few that I listen to. There's one guy I know in particular, but I can't pronounce his name, so I don't want to butcher it. But anyway, like, you don't even have to know their names. You'll find them after a few people. There's very few men on the internet anymore who are still men. It's just kind of crazy. I've never been one of those really, like, the macho people, but it, like, and even when I was younger, I wasn't an especially strong dude. I wasn't like captain of the football team or anything. But it's just crazy that even a lot of these buff dudes sound like chicks when they talk. But whatever. Maybe they'll finally transition one day. We never know. So anyway, what other books we have here? We got Dinesh D'Souza, The Big Lie. Now, there's some hyperbole in this book. And it's all, the subtitle of the book is Exposing the Nazi Roots of the American Left. And really what it is, the whole book is kind of an argument of something that I've thought for a really long time. And that is that, because everybody is always talking about fascism these days because, no kings, which is really ridiculous. Like, how can you be a king and be a fascist at the same time? It doesn't make any sense at all. And I made that point on somebody's Facebook post, and there was a guy who's like, well, you could be a king and a fascist. And it's like, yeah, but, like, Trump is neither. He's not a fascist or a king. He's a president who was elected, like a duly elected president, who is actually trying to do the things he was elected to do. Like, he's, I'm not trying to say he's doing everything right, but, like, he's obviously made some mistakes. But it's like, no, the guy was democratically elected. He wasn't born into it. Okay, that's what a king is. Basically, if this guy was a dictator and a king, like, you would be executed for even talking like this. So, like if you knew anything about dictators, if you were to go into history and read about the dictators, like Stalin, if you had a newspaper on your table at home and set your coffee on a picture of Stalin that was on the newspaper, and your roommate ratted you out, you would get executed. Okay, that's not the case today. And I've heard people go, oh, well, that's not a good argument. No, it is. That is the argument. Is that, like, you've never lived under a dictator. We've been coddled for so long that, like, anything to us that we don't like is fascist and a dictator. And especially people on the left think that everything that they perceive to be to the right of them is fascist. So, if you just go as far to the left as you can possibly go, like, in their minds, going further to the left means perfecting themselves more. They're more righteous the further left they go. So they go as far left as they could go. And when you do that, eventually you're going to run into communism, because it doesn't really take, a very long distance in the direction of left to reach communism. And along the way, you're also going to bump into fascism, usually right before you hit communism. Because let's face it, both of those movements were birthed on the left, because they're both socialist revolutionary movements. The only real difference is one of them is international socialism, while the other one's national socialism. So the only real difference is the nationalistic part of it. But even the communists, I think they had their own sort of flavor of nationalism that they would vehemently deny, and their adherents would vehemently deny. But to me, they've always just sort of been the retarded conjoined twins of socialism. And really, if you go further to the right, eventually you'll hit the center from where they're at. And then you keep going, you keep going, you keep going. To me, what would be considered like far right would be like theocratic monarchy kind of thing. And where a lot of this comes from is the French Revolution, where they would have their assembly, and whoever was sitting to the right of the speaker, their group were the ones who were adherents to the throne and to the church, and those were the people who were on the right, and the people on the left were the Jacobins, however you want to say it, and those were the revolutionaries, and they tended to be more socialist in their economic worldview, just like the fascists, just like the communists. So both of those movements were birthed out of that Jacobin sort of movement, the left side of the assembly. And on the right side, you had what would today be considered more the conservatives, and like I would say like the Catholics, the papacy and all that stuff, loyalty to the papacy, loyalty to the crown, the church, things that are considered traditional. And then, you've got the center of today's political climate, which the center is more where you're going to find like libertarians, capitalists, and free thinkers, individualists, people who follow the tenets of the founding of the United States of America, people who read stuff like, the forefathers. The forefathers basically were would be centrists today. They weren't particularly loyal to any crown. Like, they were rebelling against the crown in England, so they were rebelling against those ultra right-wing kind of conservatives of England who were trying to control them. But mainly it wasn't even, I don't think, ideological. It was just to preserve their own freedom and to not be tyrannized over. And so on the right wing you do have tyranny, but it's a different kind of tyranny than what you get from fascism. And so I've been reading about a lot of that stuff, and I'll give you some names in case you don't believe me. The writers that I've read from on fascism, not necessarily Dinesh D'Souza. To me, this book is kind of it's kind of laughable in a way, but like it's not that it's all untrue, but it's hyperbolic. But if you want to really know the truth about it, don't read about fascism from writers who are on the far left, because what they're going to do is they're trying to clean their own reputation, and they're trying to foist everything that is fascism off of themselves and onto the right wing, because they hate the right wing. They want you to hate the right wing. And so they put all the blame on the right. The truth is that fascism was always left wing until the point when they started to accrue power and they started to have more influence. And when you're trying to become part of the official government in Europe, because there's so many political parties, you have to coalesce with other parties. And so the fascists in many ways found common ground with some of the parties that were on the right, because they were more nationalist and because a lot of them were pro-military. And so they found common cause with, like, the Catholic movements and stuff like that. And so that really is the extent to which they have anything to do whatsoever with religion. Because one of the big gripes about fascism in America today, they say that it's this religious thing, like the Christians are fascist, which is crazy, because there was absolutely zero. Like, if you take the Venn diagram, they're not even connected. There's zero common cause between fascism and anything like Christianity or capitalism or anything like that. They didn't even like individualism. They didn't like liberalism at all. So anything that is in today's center or right of center has nothing whatsoever to do with fascism. But those are the people who take all the insults today. It's mainly just because, the people on the left who like to throw those words around, they just listen to their college professors for so long, they actually just start to believe that stuff. They take it on authority that fascism is inherently right-wing, which I just really don't think it is. I've had this theory for a long time. Now I'll name some of the names of some of the writers that I've read from. You've got Roger Griffin, you've got Robert Paxton, you've got Stanley Payne. I don't know how to say his name right. I think it's Zeev Sternhell is another one, and many others. I can't think of all of them off the top of my head, but I've read from several books from all of those different writers. And these people, they're not partisans. They're academics, and I've listened to some of their conferences, and they all get together and they talk about it. And the one thing that they all kind of have in common, these non-partisan like students of fascism who have dedicated their entire lives to the study of it and are trying to get to the bottom of it, none of them agree on what the definition of fascism is. So nobody really knows what it is precisely. It's one of those things where you kind of know it when you see it, but you can't put your finger on it when you try to describe it to somebody. And I'm not even going to try to go into that here right now, because the books are available. Everybody can find out for themselves. I think that people like to cherry pick the concept of fascism and what it means to them. Some people say, oh, it's just the blending of corporate and government, and that's the bottom line. That's all there is to it. There's some people that say, oh, it's ultranationalism. Some people, oh, it's just right-wing racism. But, if you look back at, like, even the original Italian fascists, they weren't racist at the beginning. I think that eventually they sort of co-opted some of the stuff. Once Hitler started to notice Mussolini, and he felt like, oh, now I'm kind of on par with this guy, that they had things in common and that they had a cause together, and that they were fighting the Allies, and they, suddenly this guy's my friend, right? The enemy of my enemy. And so they adopted certain, racist policies. But that was so much later, after they had already accumulated all this power. It wasn't who they were when they started, when Mussolini was the editor of the leading socialist newspaper in Italy, Avanti. Okay, so a lot of people don't know that he was like one of the leading lights of socialism, obviously a left-wing movement in Italy in the late teens, early 20s. And not only that, but Mussolini was sort of a chip off the old block. His father was a dedicated socialist as well. Now, after they had, and this you'll find in Tragedy and Hope, was that the international bankers began to take notice of Mussolini at some point and saw that he was influential and popular amongst socialist circles in Italy. And they eventually kind of bribed him and got him to sort of take on these causes of intervention into the war. Like, they wanted to bring Italy into the war, and so they got him to spread like militaristic sort of propaganda. And so he took the bait, he took the bribe, and framed a lot of his arguments, a lot of his socialist arguments, into the language of militarism and nationalism. And then he drew from the sort of pool of like World War I veterans as being to sort of people his militant group, his sort of paramilitary sort of mob that he was creating. So he would use like war veterans, and so these people were not very political in themselves. A lot of them were just kind of like laborers who didn't have any sense of real politics, but they had been through the war, and so it was easy for him to sort of co-opt these guys to bring out this movement of like these sort of ultra nationalistic military types, and might is right, and we're gonna just kick your ass if you don't go along with us. I mean, well, who does that sound like today? It's, you know, Antifa sort of embodies the worst parts of fascism. As much as they pretend to be against the whole movement and, oh, you know, we don't like them because they're right wing and because, you know, it's not that they're really against fascism. They're actually against conservatism. They're against the right. And they are basically pro-communist and they are anarchists. And what they really want to do, because they're just typical revolutionary types and most of them are completely uneducated, is they just want to destroy whatever they can. They just say, we've accepted that the United States of America is this really evil, horrible place, and we're just going to tear it down. And that just sounds like fun, especially if you have somebody paying you to do it. And so it's a job. It's a fun job. You get to fuck shit up. And in the meantime, you get to be part of something big because you're just kind of a loser, you know, who is overweight with purple hair and sits in your basement. So, like, it's not so much that they're anti-fascist because they don't even know what fascism is. They've just been told that everybody on the right is fascism, since they don't like those people, that they're just going to go after them. And so, yeah, that's that. I didn't really know where to go from there. I kind of lost my thread because I was going to make another point, but it doesn't even matter. I think enough is said at this point. You get the picture. So another horrible left-wing movement, Chairman Mao Zedong. They don't teach about him in college. You never learn about Mao Zedong in college. And the reason is because that's a far leftist movement that really was exactly like the Antifa of today, where they try to purge people, they cancel people, they dox people. But they took it a little further back then because they didn't have the sort of political structures that we have today. Now, our political structures and our law and order is dissolving in this country. But it's not as bad as it was in China. They didn't have much infrastructure for law and order at the time. And these people just went around and they took it to the point of just raiding people's villages, torturing them, and even cannibalizing them. I know it sounds crazy, but they actually would eat their opponent. Imagine if Antifa came to your door and ate you. And that's pretty much what it was in certain parts. And it wasn't like that in every part, in every province, but what was it? I don't even know how to say it. I think it's like the Guangxin province or something like that. I can't remember exactly the name of it. But one of them got really bad, and they were cannibalizing people and torturing people and like pulling their skin off and boiling them and shit. And so that's really how far these movements can get. But they don't teach about the Chinese Cultural Revolution in American universities because they're trying to sell you on socialism. And you know, once you come to find out that every single socialist movement in every single country it's been tried in has resulted in the deaths of, in this case, 70 million people. Under the Chinese Cultural Revolution, they killed 70 million of their own people. I don't know how many people were killed under Stalin, but that's another movement that you're not going to hear about. You'll never have the Gulag Archipelago as required reading in an American university because, again, they're trying to sell you on socialism. They want to tell you that it's great. They don't want to tell you that, like, yeah, leftists are capable of being tyrannical assholes as well and torturing their opponents and crushing their balls and slamming their fingers in the door or heating up their cell, you know, to the point to where they're sweating a denunciation out of them or sweating what do you call it when you confess? The confession. They sweat a confession out of you by heating up your cell. I know some people would probably think in Russia that would feel good for a little bit, but I think at some point it becomes a little bit uncomfortable. Okay, so look at this fucking book, man. This is like it's like a ham sandwich that you could get at the deli, you know, like this. That would be, if you got a ham sandwich that was that fat, I would go there and eat every day at lunch for the rest of my life. But this book, War and Peace by Leo Tolstoy, it's It's a fat fucking book, and you can see that I'm not very far in it. Like, look where my bookmark is. That's not the end of the book. That's the beginning of the book. And so I'm not very far. And even I don't really spend much time on that one. But suffice to say, there's like 500 characters in the book. It's crazy. It's this labyrinth of neural networks that are firing in your brain trying to put the pieces together because there's so many people. And I guess Russian literature is often like that, maybe. I don't know, because like Dostoevsky is the only real Russian writer that I've ever read from. I've read The Possessed, which is a brilliant book, and this one is a lot like it. I mean, these books are similar. It's a little bit of a different time period because this book, it's a period piece, and it's set at a time when I think that's Napoleon on the front, if I'm not mistaken. What was I going to say? It's set in Russia during the time when they were invaded by France, and Napoleon was there. Okay, and so it's kind of from the perspective of like the Russian aristocracy, from what I've seen, like all these kind of rich. I mean, it probably gets into all kinds of shit, but it's sort of at the beginning of the book. It's sort of all these like. Russian aristocrats getting together and having their little soirees and stuff. And a lot of the young men are like going away either to the military or they're going to college or they're doing this or they're doing that. They're falling in love. There's all these kids like falling in love with each other. And there's not a whole lot of substantive plot going on where I'm at in the book. It's just kind of introducing the characters. And and you're seeing these people debate politics, and some people are really against Napoleon, and some people are actually kind of like apologists for Napoleon, who just invaded their country, which is weird. And like people are going around speaking French, which is really weird. Like it's like if we were invaded by a foreign country, by a foreign nation, like. Would we be learning their language and like respecting their values and taking on their culture, like, which is something that it seems like this is like an elite thing, which I can almost see kind of in America today, where like I think that if today's liberals, like if we were to be invaded by a foreign nation, like today's liberals would probably take the side of the invaders and still like and try to turn them against like the right. And because that's just how the left is. They're the type that would embrace the invaders. And so that seems to be what's kind of going on there, is that these kind of like wealthy, elite kind of liberal types are like, those are the ones who are sort of embracing the culture of the French who have just invaded them. And they're hanging out at their little tea parties with their, with their little, I don't want to say crumpets because that's British, but they're sitting there, all hoity-toity in their little groups, yucking it up, throwing French phrases in there and everything, trying to be cool. For some reason, it seems like, okay, so I know some Russian people because I used to take Russian classes in college. And it seems to me that the Russians, very much like the Dutch, seem to think that the French are where it's at. And those are probably like the only two nationalities that think that. Like most people hate the French, but it seems like Russians and Dutch people like both think the French are the shit. It's just so funny. And so I've noticed that a lot of Russians will learn to speak French and English and often German. Those are the languages that a Russian will be willing to learn. Because during the Soviet era, I mean, Russia, the sphere of influence from Moscow was just radiant. It went in seemingly in all directions. Kind of probably stopped at China, but not quite. I mean, you had the Chinese communists, and so communism went far and wide. Now, I don't know if that was a direct result of the Russians per se, because even the Bolshevik Revolution was aided and abetted by Western financiers. And you find that when you read Anthony Sutton, that was like, those were American companies that were enabling. The Bolshevik Revolution probably would not have succeeded without American, British, and international bankers bankrolling the whole thing. And that just it's like right up here, like we're talking about the Antifa thing, like with George Soros funding, donating dozens of millions of dollars to this No Kings protest. It's just the stupidest thing. Bunch of clowns, bunch of idiots, bunch of chuckleheads. I can't believe anybody would even go to this thing. But I mean, apparently a lot of people were paid to go to it. But I mean, I know people who went to this thing and think that it's like the cat's meow. These people are idiots. Stupid fucking people. But what are you going to do, right? You got to live with them. But anyway, Foreign Affairs. This is one of my favorite journals to read. This is a Council on Foreign Relations publication. And I don't like it because it's Council on Foreign Relations. But in a way, I kind of do. It's not that I agree with the Council on Foreign Relations. I actually disagree with the Council on Foreign Relations. But what's interesting about it is that the Council on Foreign Relations is a manifestation of the network. I know I keep saying that, but we'll have to get to that. And a lot of this comes from, right here. This book, Tragedy and Hope 101 by Joseph Plummer, it draws upon a set of books. And those books that it draws upon is, you guessed it, Tragedy and Hope by Carol Quigley. The Anglo-American Establishment by Carol Quigley. Books like None Dare Call It a Conspiracy by Gary Allen. Books, also the Anthony Sutton stuff, like the Wall Street and the Bolshevik Revolution. What's his name? Griffin. G. Edward Griffin, who wrote The Creature from Jekyll Island. And then The Committee of 300 by John Campbell, or is it Joseph Campbell? Joseph Campbell, I want to say. So those are the books that this sort of draws from. And it just sort of briefly, because Tragedy and Hope, the book by Carol Quigley, is 1,300 pages, and most people in the world will never read it. Even the people I know who read a lot are not going to read that book. But I'm reading it. I'm about 350 pages into it. And this book that sort of sums it up, it's like the Cliff Notes for that book plus several others. It talks about the network, which is... I've spoken about this in other episodes. But it's basically the Anglo-American Establishment. And that book, bearing that title, also by Carol Quigley, is almost sort of like the genealogy of this group. And it starts with Cecil Rhodes being influenced by John Ruskin to sort of try to fulfill Ruskin's dream. And even I can never say the guy's name, Rudyard Kipling. This is not the first time I've stumbled over this name. The whole idea of white man's burden, and that the British felt the need to take all their civilization and spread it out all over the world and introduce the third world and the tribal world to Christianity, and like ideas of democracy and individualism and capitalism and stuff like that. And so they wanted to civilize the darker world, and they did. They colonized in South Africa, India, China, and it. When you read Tragedy and Hope, it talks about the progress of all that colonization, but it also talks about the history of World War One. It's sort of all over the place. This is sort of scattershot thing, but it's very full in detail. So it's not that it seems almost like it's random in its distribution of subjects, but it all ties back to this network of, and people want to call it what they will, a secret society. It was Masonic in its structure, but I wouldn't say it was. I mean, I don't really know what the Masonic values were, but the structure of the secret society was like the Masons. They wanted to try to keep the inner circle a secret, and then they had an outer circle of helpers, and then beyond that they had everybody who they passed their propaganda through. And so what they would do is they would infiltrate the media, they would infiltrate the universities, and every influential sphere of modern life. And so they would place people in positions of power in government. They would place people in, certain universities, kind of starting with Oxford and all the attendant schools that were affiliated with it, Belial, All Souls, like all these different groups. And they sort of monopolized these positions of power in all these different institutions. And they would arrange marriages, and they would, it was a big tennis club, a sort of glorified, racquetball club, you could call it. What you'd expect to see with yuppies, like in the 80s, like you watch movies like Trading Places, and you've got these groups of people who through their network, they wield power, they wield institutional power. And, you've got Winthorpe who's going to marry Buffy, down at the racket club or whatever. But, she's got her own thing going. She's got her other orbiters that come around her, and these are other rich boys and whatever. But, long story short, it's this social network, and a lot of it has to do with money and influence. And it just gives the sort of genealogy. It's like reading the book of Numbers, or like reading the white pages, actually. If you were to read the white pages, imagine how fun that would be. That's kind of what it's like when you read the Anglo-American establishment. But you learn to find out who all these characters are, and most of them have books that they've written. And so you get people like Lionel Curtis in there, who wrote The Commonwealth of God. And you've got, that's an interesting book. It talks about how they took the British sort of empire and sort of tried to clean up the nefarious aspects of their image, being this, imperialist system, and that we're going to call it a commonwealth now. And what we're going to do is we're going to bring all of these, colonial projects. We're going to give them like semi-autonomy, but there's going to be like a governance board, which is based in Britain, and we're still going to extend our influence, but we're going to show the world that these people have a chance of becoming independent. And after a lot of time, some of them did. But this network still survives today, and a lot of people are like, "Oh, that's impossible. That can't happen. You can't have a secret society last 100 years." Well, it's gone more than that. It's started in right around 1900, and so Cecil Rhodes sort of brought in basically a partner, another sort of the most powerful person he could find that would have influence, and that was Alfred Milner. And through Alfred Milner, he sent Milner to be like the head of the South African colony. And so Milner was like the governor of the South African, possession of Britain. And he ran South Africa for a while. And then they had someone else go and do India. And have someone else go and do China. And then they had these sort of nodes back in Britain that they would report to and that they were answerable to. But even like Cecil Rhodes, who started all this, he was in South Africa. He started a war, basically invaded the Dutch colonies that were there. And committed horrendous war crimes and was never held accountable for it. They just kind of sent Alfred Milner there to sort of clean up the mess. And so these groups, they continued, they radiated out, they coalesced with other groups. They ended up, they formed a coalition with the Fabian Society, and they developed what is today the Labor Party. You got Keir Starmer, he's part of this group that still exists today. Keir Starmer, probably the only one who's ever lived. He's part of this network. And it all started with this Rhodes Milner group, and nobody seems to believe in it, and people laugh at it when you talk about it. But this is the group that basically forms the backbone of what they call the New World Order, or what some people call the Illuminati. But Illuminati, even in conspiracy circles, is kind of outdated in its conception because it's a little bit misleading. Now when you think of the Illuminati, you're thinking of like Jay-Z and Katy Perry and Lady Gaga and Madonna, like in Hollywood, because these are the people who outwardly sort of profess these I think a lot of it is just image, but the whole idea of the eye and all that shit, but a lot of that is just these people are showing off. They're like, ooh, I'm in the Illuminati because I'm so rich. And they're not making really any secret about it. They pretend like they're secretive, but they're really very ostentatious about this. And I've seen lesser celebrities also they lean into the whole idea of the Illuminati. It's not something they're trying to hide. This is a PR stunt. And so really, I don't know to what degree like any of these people are really connected with the Anglo-American establishment, we can call it. But there are famous people who've been to Bilderberg and who have been on the Council of Foreign Relations. I think Angelina Jolie is one of these people. Sometimes they'll bring in like actors to sort of represent, maybe they want a representative of Hollywood in there along with all their corporatist, bankers and lawyers, because that's most of who these people are. Like most of the people who today are in these groups, like the Council on Foreign Relations and the Trilateral Commission and Bilderberg and the World Economic Forum and all this stuff. Like most of them are either tech people, they're heads of, or prominent people in corporations, or they're bankers, or they're lawyers. And now it looks like they've got some contingent from Hollywood as being a part of it for some reason. Maybe it has to do with, we're going to get all the other actors and actresses on board, because isn't it kind of strange that every actor in Hollywood has the exact same political views? I don't think it's much of a coincidence. You'd have to be really fucking stupid to think that all these people just organically believe all the same shit. Or is it more likely that there's a power structure and they all adhere to it? So obviously that's the case. And I think a lot of them are scared. They know that AI's taken over. They know that this gravy train is coming to an end. And pretty soon they're all going to be forgotten about. And Jennifer Aniston with her fucked up, overworked face is going to have to get a job at some point, because she's not going to like learn how to curb her spending and practice a little bit of frugality. She's gonna have to keep that money coming in somehow. So who knows, maybe she'll start sending out video birthday messages to people. We'll see. I know a lot of famous people like to do that because it's so fun. So again, Foreign Affairs, Council on Foreign Relations. So the British, through this group, through this aristocratic group where they pooled all their resources, it wasn't all for nothing. What they wanted to do was they wanted to bring the United States back under British control. And they succeeded in some ways. And one of those ways in which they did that was the British aristocracy started just like they formed coalitions with the Fabian Society. They came to the United States and recruited a bunch of people for the Fabian Society from the elite groups of the Eastern Seaboard elite sort of industrial class. People like the Fords, the Carnegies, the Rockefellers are a key node in this, especially the Rockefellers. And especially David Rockefeller, who I think founded at least the Trilateral Commission, which he with the Trilateral Commission, it was supposed to be this group that represented Europe, the United States, and Japan, and they were just supposed to we're building economic ties, and we're orchestrating economic ties between these three regional powers, and it's all just to boost the economy, and you want prosperity, right? So that was the ostensible reason for their existence, but behind the scenes they were actually running domestic policy for the United States. I don't know what they were doing for Japan, but this is where we got what's his name, the peanut farmer guy who became president back in the 70s. What's his name? Oh, Jimmy Carter. Yeah, Jimmy Carter was fished out of the Trilateral Commission, and so they spotted his talent as he was a governor in whatever state that was. What was that flyover state he was a governor in? Well, they grabbed him up, and that was David Rockefeller and Zbigniew Brzezinski, and they found Jimmy Carter and promoted him. And also Richard Gardner was also a trilateral guy. What's his name? Epstein. What's his first name? It's not Brian Epstein. Brian Epstein wasn't he the producer for the Beatles? Jeffrey Epstein was a trilateral guy. Jeffrey Epstein was also in the Council on Foreign Relations, and he also did intelligence work for some foreign and domestic intelligence agencies, and he was an arms dealer. So those are interesting things. They who was it that, can't remember the name of the guy, who basically said, well, we can't throw Jeffrey Epstein in prison because he belongs to intelligence. Well, he belonged to many powerful organizations. So this group, the Milner Group, finally got its tentacles into the United States government with David Rockefeller's project, which was the Council on Foreign Relations, where they took the Royal Institute of International Affairs from Britain and sort of fused it with the Rockefeller powers and created this corporation, basically, for the United States government. They would basically just advise the government on foreign policy ideas. And so it just, it sounds benign. They're just advisors, right? But what's funny was when you saw them actually open an office in Washington, D.C., or open a headquarters in Washington, D.C., and Hillary Clinton goes, oh, that's really great, because she's working for the State Department, right? And she goes, well, now we don't have to go all the way to New York to find out basically what their marching orders were, for them to tell us what to do. She said it kind of tongue-in-cheek, but she sort of said the quiet part out loud, is that the Council on Foreign Relations tells the State Department what to do. But they were sort of a foreign organization, being from Britain. And so as Britain tried to ensconce themselves into the United States government, they succeeded on that front. So this is just one tentacle of the giant octopus that envelops the entire world. And so, you can cue up the Twilight Zone music here, and yeah, we'll call it a day. I'm getting kind of wore out from this, and I'll try to do some more of these videos. I'm just having fun. I'm not reading off a script. Some of these things actually, will read off a page, and usually I'll do that if I am analyzing a book that is very technical or very dense, or something where I have to get the facts right. Something like when I talk about, I've got the one book that I kind of want to get back to. It actually is the Howard Sakar's Zionism book, or the History of Israel, from the rise of Zionism to our time. I enjoy going through that book, and I enjoy analyzing it, but I have to be very precise. So when I do that one, I kind of have to almost read off a script, because I don't want to get the facts wrong, because I tend to get things wrong quite a bit. And if I'm not, if I don't have the book in front of me, I'm just going off memory and my brain. Like, remember, I'm a child of the 80s and a young adult of the 90s, and the 90s was spent in a drug-fueled, like, frenzy for me. Being on tour and just being a crazy musician and doing every drug I could get my hands on for the better part of a decade. Yeah, those days are over. I've been sober for 18 years, and everything's chugging along. My kid's 14 years old now. That's crazy. 4 more years and hopefully he'll be like looking to do his own thing. I'll probably let him stay here, but if he wants to, but I can't imagine he would want to. I would think at some point, like, I don't know, with me, I got the fuck out of my house as soon as I could. As soon as I turned 18, I was gone. I was like a bullet out of the chamber. But anyway, I will let you all go, and until next time, I'll see you later.